The very nature of government seems to have changed since the days of 9/11. In the days following the collapse of the World Trade Center towers, Americans' trust of government was higher than it had been in years. Since that time, the Iraq War, news of domestic spying, and revelations of wrongdoing by government has changed that situation. Today, distrust of government is reaching highs not seen in years. In the last 2 years, Egypt and Libya have fallen into the hands of groups who often ally with groups supporting terrorism against Western interests. In Syria, the rebels President Obama and John McCain aim to support are closely tied to al-Qaeda. Our guest today is John Guandolo. He's a counterterrorism expert, and he directed the creation of the FBI's first counterterrorism training program. He's also a former FBI agent, having worked in the counterterrorism division. He helped clear the rubble at the Pentagon in the aftermath of the 9/11 attacks. Guandolo has an article out, From 9/11 to Syria: Incompetence, Cowardice, and Treason Among American Leadership. He's also got a new book coming out, Raising a Jihadi Nation. He's here to talk to us about what has happened in the last 10 years to the federal government. Welcome back to WHDT World News, John.
Thanks very much. Thanks for having me, Gary.
Now, John, what were you thinking as you walked among the shattered wreckage of the Pentagon in 9/11? Let's go back. Let's go back to that fateful day.
Well, I think as I mentioned in the article, there's a sense of deep sadness, but that turned into real anger toward the enemy and the individuals and the nations that participated in 9/11 against us. And over time, as I worked this in the FBI as a special agent and investigated these organizations and groups and came to understand what you and I have discussed previously about Hamas, Al-Qaeda, and the Muslim Brotherhood in the United States, really a lack of energy on the part of our leadership to really go after these folks here.
Well, we spoke with Michael Scheuer a few weeks ago, and this is right at the beginning of the talk of attacking Syria, and Scheuer disclosed a secret network inside the United States that is being run by Iran. So I want to talk more about these secret networks in a little bit, but
okay. Let's
talk about American leadership. In the article, you mentioned the complete collapse of leadership in America has come. What do you mean by that?
I think there's just complete catastrophic failure by American leadership, and it really goes across the board. But when we specifically talk about the jihadi threat, it bleeds into the threat from nation states, from hostile organizations, and from the movement, the Islamic movement here in the United States. And it is astonishing, is the only word that comes to mind, but it truly is gross negligence and criminally so, I believe, that the very organizations that we know from evidence are a part of the Muslim Brotherhood network here in the United States that have supported al-Qaeda and Hamas operations. The leaders of those organizations do interface and work with our National Security Council, our president, with FBI, CIA, State Department. That is catastrophic failure.
So would you be saying this, I'm going to ask you, would you be saying this if there was a Republican sitting at the Resolute desk in the Oval Office?
I have said that. And I have specifically pointed out the failures of the previous administration. This is not a political issue. This is a national security issue. The failings of the Republican Party are just as gross as those of the Democrat Party at all levels, not just at the presidential level. I mean, in Congress, when a year ago in August 2012, 5 Republican members of Congress sent letters to the inspectors generals of the key entities within our government asking if they would initiate an investigation regarding the penetration of our intelligence and security systems by the Muslim Brotherhood. It was John McCain, John Boehner, Marco Rubio, and people like that attacked those Republicans. It was their own party leadership. Those men are just simply incompetent.
So why did John McCain go to Syria?
I have no idea why he went to Syria. That's something you might want to ask him. But what I will share is the people he met with and the people he's defending. These are Al Qaeda guys. And when we talk about specifically Syria and the quote unquote rebels, while there are factions in the organizations and the individuals that are fighting against the Assad regime, you can't make a mistake. These are still jihadis.
So if the global war on terror is focused against Al Qaeda, John McCain goes to Syria and meets with Al Qaeda. What's wrong with this picture?
Yeah, I mean, I argue that at a minimum, that's aiding and abetting the enemy. You're giving them, at a minimum, propaganda to support their cause. And on the other side of it, what we're doing is we're preparing to, and in some ways already starting to give them arms. So just like we did in Libya, we are providing material support to Al Qaeda against the Gaddafi regime, what we did in Libya. Now we're doing it against the Assad regime. There's nothing rational or reasonable about this, and I would argue it's criminal.
John, let's go back to September 11th. What went wrong with the government after 9/11? What happened on that day that sent us to the track where we are now?
Well, I would say the two things that have really destroyed our ability to win this war. The first is we have yet to identify the enemy. We continue to identify the enemy in terms of groups like Al Qaeda, and really, in my experience, both in the FBI and since I left in 2008, the government continues to define our enemy or identify our enemy as Al Qaeda. And that is an extremely limited focal point of who we're up against when you have the Muslim Brotherhood as identified by the Islamic world as the leading element of what they call the global Islamic movement. You've got hundreds of jihadi organizations, Al Qaeda being the most prominent, but you've got Hamas and hundreds of others. And then you've got nation states organized under the Organization of Islamic Cooperation that all identify their objective as imposing Islamic law, and the vehicle to do it as jihad. That is the broader threat. So the first thing is we are at war and we haven't identified adequately the enemy. So you can't defeat an enemy if you don't define it and identify it. That's the first part. Second part is that we responded in war with bureaucracy, creating the Department of Homeland Security, this giant monster. And it's not just DHS, it's the bureaucracy was the response to war. And that's never appropriate. And our intelligence and security apparatus is broken. It is completely broken. So, and the American people know it because they watch a 25-year-old Muslim man walk through security cleared, or a clearly, easily identified jihadi by the way he dresses, by the color of his beard, working for TSA, while an 80-year-old nun is being patted down by a Muslim woman in hijab.
Well, I have to jump in there. What about the whole argument of racial profiling? How do you combat that in the workplace of the United States government fairly?
Well, that's the whole point. Is this is not about, well, we're just looking at this. What is the threat? What is the threat? And because we're not identifying that threat, identifying Muslim males that are 25 years old, that should be part of the group that we're taking a strong look at. Because
is the government more afraid of being politically correct or politically incorrect, so to speak, than they are of terrorism?
Of course they are. Absolutely. I mean, the fact that you have known leaders of Muslim Brotherhood organizations working inside the White House, working inside and briefing the National Security Council, all of which I've detailed in my previous writings and in my new book, Raising a Jihadi Generation. But
John, I want to talk to you more about that. I want you to name some names when we come back from this break. John Guandolo, about the secret network inside the White House that leads right to the jihadi uprising. We'll be right back.